June 1816. The late afternoon sun cast golden light through the tall windows of St. Michael's Church in Mayfair, illuminating the faces of London's finest society, gathered to witness the union of Miss Marianne Thornton and Mr. Edmund Colworth. The pews overflowed with silks and satins, with elaborate hats adorned with ostrich feathers, with the cream of the ton assembled to celebrate what everyone agreed was the match of the season. Beatrice Georgiana Thornton stood near the back of the church, her hands clasped tightly before her, watching her younger sister float down the aisle in a cloud of ivory lace. At 27, Beatrice had attended countless weddings, had served as bridesmaid more times than she cared to count, but never had the experience cut quite so deeply as watching Marianne, barely 20, achieve what Beatrice herself had failed to secure through 6 long seasons. The wedding breakfast that followed at the Colworth estate in Grosvenor Square proved even insufferably prolonged than the ceremony itself. Beatrice navigated the crowded reception rooms with practiced invisibility, perfecting the art of appearing engaged while remaining entirely overlooked, a skill honed through years of social disappointment. If you believe in stories where courage transforms humiliation into triumph, subscribe now and join us on this journey. You won't want to miss what happens next. The sprawling gardens behind the Colworth residence provided ample retreat, and Beatrice sought refuge beneath an ancient oak tree that dominated the garden's far edge, partially hidden from the main festivities by a wall of flowering shrubs. She stood there for perhaps 10 minutes, breathing in the scent of summer blooms and allowing herself a moment of quiet grief for dreams long abandoned, when voices drifted toward her from just beyond the hedge. Male voices, wealthy and confident, the sort of voices that had never known rejection or disappointment. "Colworth has done remarkably well for himself," one voice said, smooth and cultured. "Miss Marianne is an absolute vision. That family has been blessed with extraordinary beauty." "In one daughter, certainly," another voice replied with a laugh, "though I understand there is an older sister. Have you seen her?" Beatrice froze, her breath catching in her throat. "The unfortunate Miss Beatrice?" The first voice again, dripping with false sympathy. "Oh yes, I have had the displeasure. 6 seasons without a single proposal, can you imagine? 27 years old and still cluttering up ballrooms, still pretending she has prospects." The second man chuckled. "Perhaps she holds out hope that some desperate widower with a house full of children will take pity on her." "I doubt even that," a third voice interjected, colder than the others, carrying an edge of cruel amusement that made Beatrice's hands curl into fists. Nature was particularly unkind in her case. All the beauty went to the younger sister, leaving the elder with nothing but an unfortunate face and advancing age. One almost pities her family, burdened with such a millstone. Sebastian Nathaniel Winters, Marquess of Pemberton. Beatrice recognized that voice even before one of his companions addressed him by title. She had observed him from a distance throughout the season, had noted his reputation for devastating criticism and cutting remarks, had heard the whispers about his frozen heart since his wife's death 4 years prior. His 4 years of isolation and grief had constructed a brittle facade of cruelty, a challenge he subconsciously sought. "Harsh, Pemberton," the first man said, though his tone suggested approval rather than censure. "Though I suppose accuracy need not be kind." "Kindness is a luxury I grant for those who merit it," Sebastian replied coolly. "Miss Beatrice Thornton has had 6 years to secure a match and has failed spectacularly. At some point, one must accept reality and cease inflicting one's presence on society. The marriage mart is no place for charity cases." Something inside Beatrice cracked, the broken pieces settling instantly into an unyielding, resolute core. 6 years of swallowing pride, of enduring pity and condescension, of maintaining dignity in the face of constant rejection, all converged into a single burning moment of absolute clarity. She would not accept this. Not anymore. Not ever again. Beatrice stepped around the hedge with deliberate precision, her spine straight, her head high. The 3 men stood in a loose circle, crystal glasses of wine in hand, their expressions shifting from surprise to poorly concealed disdain as they registered her presence. Sebastian, tall and imposing in his perfectly tailored black coat, regarded her with those cold gray eyes that had intimidated countless debutantes and hardened matrons alike. "Miss Thornton," he said, his tone utterly flat. "I trust you enjoyed the ceremony." "I did, my lord," Beatrice replied, her voice steady despite the rage coursing through her veins. "Though I confess I found the conversation afterward far more illuminating than any sermon." Sebastian's eyes narrowed slightly. "Indeed? I am gratified to hear that some portion of the festivities met with your approval." "Oh, tremendously so," Beatrice continued, taking a step closer. "It is always educational to discover what gentlemen truly think when they believe themselves safely beyond earshot of their victims." The other two men had the grace to look uncomfortable, but Sebastian merely raised one dark eyebrow. "Victims is rather a strong word, Miss Thornton. I was merely offering an honest assessment of observable facts." "Observable facts," Beatrice repeated softly, her fingers tightening on the stem of the wineglass she still carried from the reception. "How extraordinarily brave of you, my lord, to critique a woman's appearance and circumstances from the safety of your hedge. Tell me, do you reserve such courage for all your social interactions, or only when the target cannot defend herself?" "If you were meant to overhear," Sebastian said, his tone cooling further, "then perhaps you should consider whether the content of my observations might contain useful truth rather than giving way to mere wounded pride. It happened in a single fluid motion, propelled by 6 years of accumulated humiliation and this final, unforgivable cruelty." Beatrice's arm rose, the wineglass tilted, and the contents, deep red and still quite full, arced through the air in a perfect crimson stream. The wine struck Sebastian directly in the face, splashing across his impeccable white cravat, his expensive coat, dripping from his aristocratic features with deeply satisfying completeness. For one frozen heartbeat, nobody moved. The Marquess of Pemberton stood utterly still, wine dripping from his chin, his expression one of absolute shock that might have been comical under any other circumstances. Then the garden dissolved into astonished whispers and gasps. Gasps echoed from multiple directions as other guests emerged from various garden paths, drawn by the spectacle. Beatrice heard her mother's horrified shriek, saw Marianne's pale face appear at the terrace doors, registered the delighted whispers already beginning to spread through the crowd like wildfire. "You wanted observable facts, my lord," Beatrice said clearly, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent garden. "Here is one for you. I may be 27 without prospects. I may lack my sister's beauty, but I possess something you clearly do not: dignity and basic human decency. And the courage to show my face in society without hiding behind cruel observations and a title." She set the empty wineglass on a nearby stone pedestal with deliberate care, then turned and walked back toward the house with her head high, leaving Sebastian Winters standing motionless in the garden, red wine still dripping from his aristocratic features, now stripped of their customary hauteur. The scandal exploded across London society with the force of a powder keg meeting flame. By the following morning, every drawing room in Mayfair buzzed with competing versions of the story, each more embellished than the last. Some claimed Beatrice had thrown the entire bottle. Others insisted she had slapped the Marquess before throwing the wine. A particularly creative account suggested she had upended an entire punch bowl over his head. The truth, as always, mattered less than the story. Beatrice spent the night after the wedding in her family's townhouse, listening to her mother's hysterical weeping and her father's grim silence. Marianne had departed on her wedding trip, blissfully absent from the immediate fallout, though Beatrice suspected her younger sister would hear all about it soon enough. "Ruined," Lady Thornton moaned from her position on the drawing-room sofa, a vinegar-soaked cloth pressed to her forehead. "Completely and utterly ruined." How will we ever show our faces again? How will we explain this to anyone? Perhaps, Beatrice said quietly from her position by the window, you might begin by explaining why no one seems remotely concerned about what Lord Pemberton said to provoke such a response. What he said? Her mother's voice rose to a near shriek. What does it matter what he said? You assaulted a Marquess, Beatrice. A Marquess, in public, at your own sister's wedding. Do you understand what you have done? I understand perfectly, Beatrice replied, her gaze fixed on the street below. I defended my dignity against a man who believed his rank gave him permission to be cruel. Lord Thornton finally spoke, his voice heavy with disappointment. You have made yourself unmarriageable, Beatrice. Whatever slim chances remained after 6 failed seasons are now completely destroyed. No gentleman will overlook this scandal. Excellent, Beatrice said, surprising herself with the conviction in her tone. Then I need never again endure the humiliation of pretending to seek the approval of men who consider me a charity case and a burden. Her mother sobbed harder. Her father's expression hardened into something cold and final. Your Aunt Constance has agreed to receive you at her home, he announced. You will leave for Dorset within the week. Perhaps distance and time will allow this scandal to fade sufficiently that you might eventually return without bringing complete shame upon this family. Exile. Beatrice had expected punishment, but the swift efficiency of this judgment still stole her breath. To be sent away, to be hidden like something shameful, to be removed from the only life she had ever known. For how long? She asked quietly. For as long as necessary, her father replied. Until society forgets, or until you learn proper contrition, whichever comes first. The following days passed in a blur of packing and avoiding visitors. Several former acquaintances attempted to call, drawn by curiosity rather than concern, but Lady Thornton turned them all away. The scandal sheets published increasingly ridiculous accounts, transforming Beatrice into either a madwoman or a hero depending on the publication's editorial stance. Most disturbing of all was the complete silence from Lord Pemberton himself. Beatrice had expected retaliation, had braced herself for public denunciation or even legal action. A gentleman of his standing would surely demand satisfaction for such a public humiliation. Yet days passed with no response whatsoever. No statements to the papers, no visits demanding apology, no social consequences leveraged against the Thornton family beyond those they inflicted upon themselves. The silence proved more unsettling than any punishment could have been. 6 days after Marianne's wedding, Beatrice departed London in her family's second carriage, accompanied only by her lady's maid, Sarah, and a mountain of luggage that suggested permanent exile rather than temporary retreat. Her mother had not emerged from her rooms to say farewell. Her father had offered a stiff, formal goodbye in the entrance hall, his disappointment evident in every rigid line of his posture. As the carriage rolled through the London streets toward the southern roads, Beatrice pressed her face to the window, watching the familiar townhouses and monuments disappear behind her. Somewhere in this city, Sebastian Winters was continuing his life as though nothing had happened, as though he had not fundamentally altered hers with a few cruel words overheard in a garden. She wondered if he ever thought about that moment, about the woman who had dared to strike back. Then she turned her face forward, toward Dorset and her aunt, and an uncertain future, and decided she would never wonder about Sebastian Winters again. The journey to Dorset required 2 full days of travel, with an overnight stop at a coaching inn that offered questionable beds and even more questionable food. Beatrice spent most of the journey staring out the window at the changing landscape, watching London's dense streets give way to countryside, villages growing smaller and more scattered as they ventured deeper into rural England. Sarah attempted conversation several times, but eventually accepted her mistress's need for silence. The maid had served the Thornton family for 12 years and understood the currents of scandal and shame that now swept them all along like helpless boats in a storm. They arrived at Willowmere Cottage on a gray afternoon, with clouds gathering overhead and the scent of approaching rain thick in the air. The cottage itself proved to be a generous designation for what was actually a substantial house, built of honey-colored stone and surrounded by gardens that had been allowed to grow somewhat wild but remained beautiful in their untamed state. Aunt Constance emerged before the carriage had fully stopped. A tall, angular woman of 60, with steel-gray hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She had been widowed young, had never remarried, and lived a life of contentment that society considered tragic, but which Constance herself appeared to find perfectly satisfactory. "Beatrice," she said simply, opening the carriage door herself before any servant could approach. "Welcome to Willowmere. I trust the journey was not too dreadful." "It was bearable, Aunt," Beatrice replied, accepting her aunt's hand as she stepped down from the carriage. "Thank you for agreeing to take me in." Constance studied her niece with those penetrating eyes, then smiled faintly. "My dear girl, I did not agree to take you in because I felt obligated. I agreed because I have long anticipated your demonstrating such spirit." Despite everything, despite the exhaustion and shame and uncertainty, Beatrice felt a laugh bubble up from somewhere deep inside her chest. "You approve?" "I think," Constance said, linking her arm through Beatrice's and guiding her toward the house, "that you finally showed the backbone I always suspected you possessed. Now come inside, have tea, and tell me everything. I want to hear about this Sebastian Winters and why he deserved such spectacular humiliation." Willowmere Cottage became a sanctuary Beatrice had not known she needed. The house itself sprawled comfortably across 2 floors, with rooms that felt lived in rather than formally maintained, filled with books and art and the accumulated treasures of a woman who pleased only herself. The gardens extended for nearly 3 acres, including a small orchard and a kitchen garden that Constance tended herself with the help of 2 local men who came twice weekly. But the true treasure of the property revealed itself on Beatrice's 3rd morning at Willowmere. Following a path through the gardens, she discovered an enormous oak tree reigning alone in a meadow beyond the formal gardens. The tree appeared ancient, its trunk so wide 3 people might barely encircle it, its branches spreading out to create a canopy of shade that could shelter a dozen people comfortably. Someone had built a bench around the tree's base, weathered wood worn smooth by years of use. Beatrice sat there for an hour that morning, listening to birds and wind and the profound silence of the countryside, feeling something in her chest slowly begin to unknot. She returned to the oak every day after that, bringing books from Constance's extensive library, sometimes reading, sometimes simply sitting in stillness, allowing herself to feel the full weight of everything that had happened without the burden of her mother's hysterics or her father's disappointment. On the 7th day of her exile, exactly 2 weeks after Marianne's wedding, a letter arrived. Constance brought it to Beatrice personally, finding her at the oak tree, as had become her habit. The older woman's expression was curious as she extended the folded paper, sealed with blue wax, impressed with a crest Beatrice did not immediately recognize. "This came by special courier from London," Constance said. "The man insisted on delivering it directly rather than leaving it with the post." Beatrice accepted the letter with trembling fingers, turning it over to examine the seal. A falcon in flight, rendered in exquisite detail. Memory stirred slowly, reluctantly, bringing recognition she did not want. The crest of the Marquess of Pemberton. "Shall I wait?" Constance asked gently. "Please," Beatrice whispered. She broke the seal with unsteady hands and unfolded the single sheet of heavy paper. The handwriting was bold and precise, each letter formed with obvious care. "Miss Thornton, I write to offer an apology that comes 2 weeks too late, but which I hope you will accept nonetheless. My words in your sister's garden were inexcusable. They were cruel, callous, and beneath the behavior of any gentleman worthy of the title. I had been seeking such a challenge subconsciously for years, and your act offered the necessary catharsis. I have spent the past fortnight examining my conduct and motivations with uncomfortable honesty. I find myself without adequate excuse. I cannot claim I was in my cups, for I had consumed very little. I cannot claim I was provoked, for you had done nothing to warrant such assessment. I can only confess that I have spent 4 years constructing armor of cruelty and criticism, believing that if I judged others harshly enough, I might avoid being judged myself. You were absolutely correct. I lack dignity, decency, and courage. I hide behind my title and use words as weapons against those who cannot defend themselves. Your response, while shocking to witness, was nothing more than I deserved. I do not expect forgiveness. I do not presume to ask that you think well of me. I write only to ensure you know that I recognize the depth of my transgression and that I carry the shame of it as I should. I hope Dorset proves peaceful and restorative. I hope you find there the kindness and respect you should have been shown in London. With profound regret and lasting remorse, Sebastian Winters, Marquess of Pemberton. Beatrice read the letter 3 times, each reading bringing fresh confusion. She had expected many things from Sebastian Winters, but genuine contrition had not been among them. "What does it say?" Constance asked finally. "He apologizes," Beatrice said slowly. "He apologizes and takes complete responsibility and suggests he deserved exactly what I gave him." "And do you believe him?" Beatrice stared at the letter, at the careful handwriting, at words that felt sincere in a way she had not anticipated. "I do not know," she admitted. "I know what I heard in that garden. I know the cruelty in his voice. But this letter suggests a capacity for self-reflection I would not have credited him with possessing. It felt dangerous to accept contrition from a man whose cruelty had once offered such sharp clarity." "What will you do?" "Nothing," Beatrice decided, folding the letter carefully and tucking it into her book. "He has offered his apology. I have received it. That is sufficient conclusion to this entire miserable affair." She did not burn the letter, though she told herself she should. She kept it instead, tucked between the pages of her book, reading it again occasionally when she was alone beneath the oak tree, trying to reconcile the cruel voice from the garden with the penitent tone of the written words. 3 days later, another letter arrived. "Miss Thornton, I realize this second correspondence may be unwelcome, and if you wish me to cease writing, you need only send word, and I shall respect your request without question. I wrote my previous letter from obligation to apologize. I write this one from genuine curiosity about something you said in the garden, something that has occupied my thoughts considerably since that afternoon. You accused me of lacking courage. At the time, stunned and dripping with wine, I could not properly respond. But reflection has led me to conclude you were entirely correct. I have been a coward for 4 years, hiding behind cruelty and isolation, convincing myself that coldness constituted strength. You, however, demonstrated remarkable courage. To respond to public humiliation with such direct and decisive action required strength I clearly do not possess. To walk away with your head high, having defended your dignity against a man of superior rank and social power, showed a fortitude I can only admire. I find myself wondering, Miss Thornton, if you might be willing to correspond. Not from pity or obligation, but from genuine interest in understanding the perspective of someone who possesses the courage I lack. You need not agree, of course. I understand I have forfeited any claim to your time or attention. But if you were willing, I would value your thoughts on matters of consequence beyond the superficiality that dominates London society. Your words in the garden suggested a mind of substance beneath the injury I inflicted, and I find I regret never having sought conversation with you before I offered unwarranted criticism. Again, if this is unwelcome, you need only say so. Yours in continued remorse and newfound respect, Sebastian Winters. Beatrice read this second letter alone beneath the oak tree, the afternoon sun filtering through leaves overhead. Continued remorse and newfound respect. Words that should have soothed the wounds his original cruelty had opened, yet somehow only made everything more complicated. She composed her response carefully that evening, sitting at the small writing desk in her room at Willowmere. Lord Pemberton, your letters arrive like rain after drought, unexpected and difficult to trust. You ask if I am willing to correspond. I find myself uncertain. You wounded me deeply, my lord. Your words in that garden gave voice to every cruel whisper, every pitying glance, every assessment I have endured across 6 long seasons. To hear them spoken so casually, as though my worth could be measured and found wanting by a man who knew nothing of me beyond my appearance and marital status, cut more deeply than you can imagine. Yet your letters suggest genuine remorse, and I am not so hardened that I cannot acknowledge sincerity when I encounter it. You ask about my courage, but I wonder if you understand it was born of absolute desperation. 6 years of swallowing pride had left no room for further humiliation. Your words were merely the final weight that broke through carefully maintained composure. You wish to understand perspective beyond London superficiality? Very well. Here is truth for you. Society teaches women our value exists only in beauty and marriage prospects. When we possess neither, we are expected to simply disappear, to accept our worthlessness with grace and gratitude for whatever small kindnesses are occasionally extended. I spent 6 years believing this assessment. I allowed myself to become small, quiet, unobtrusive. I accepted that I was the unfortunate sister, the burden, the failure. Your words in the garden did not tell me anything I had not already been taught to believe about myself. But something in the casual cruelty of your tone, in your dismissive confidence that you had the right to judge me, shattered that acceptance. I realized I had been complicit in my own diminishment. I had swallowed the poison society offered and called it truth. So yes, I threw wine in your face. Not from courage, but from sudden recognition that accepting such treatment was its own form of cowardice. If you wish to correspond further, I will accept on one condition. No flattery, no social pleasantries, no dancing around difficult truths. If we are to write, let it be with complete honesty, even when honesty proves uncomfortable. Beatrice Thornton. She sent the letter the following morning, then spent 3 days regretting it, certain she had revealed too much, offered too much honesty to a man who had already proven himself capable of weaponizing personal information. His response arrived exactly 1 week after his second letter. Miss Thornton, your condition is accepted without reservation. Complete honesty, even when uncomfortable, even when it reveals me to be precisely the coward you named me. You wrote that society teaches women their value exists only in beauty and marriage prospects. Society teaches men something equally poisonous, though different in substance. We are taught that rank and power are sufficient markers of worth, that cruelty can be mistaken for strength, that emotional vulnerability is weakness to be avoided at all costs. I lost my wife 4 years ago. Helena died in childbirth, along with the son I had foolishly believed would secure my legacy. The grief nearly destroyed me, Miss Thornton. For months I could barely function, could barely remember how to navigate daily existence without the woman who had been my closest companion since we were children. Eventually, the grief subsided into something harder, colder. I told myself I was recovering, becoming strong again. In truth, I was merely building walls so high that no feeling could penetrate me. Not grief, certainly, but also not joy, not warmth, not connection of any kind. The cruelty you witnessed in your sister's garden has become my default mode. I criticize others ruthlessly because it allows me to avoid examining my own failings. I judge women harshly because I cannot bear to consider that another might breach the defenses I have so carefully constructed. I hide behind my title because stripping away rank would force me to confront how little substance remains beneath it. You asked for honesty, even when uncomfortable. Here it is. I am empty, Miss Thornton. I have spent 4 years hollowing myself out, removing everything human and vulnerable, replacing warmth with ice and connection with contempt. I look at your courage in reclaiming your dignity, and I recognize how thoroughly I have abandoned my own. Your letter spoke of being complicit in your own diminishment. I understand this completely. I have been complicit in my own destruction, mistaking isolation for safety, confusing cruelty with strength. I do not write seeking absolution or sympathy. I write because your words in the garden were the first genuine communication I have experienced in 4 years. Even covered in wine, shocked and humiliated, I felt more alive in that moment than I have since Helena's death. Someone finally treated me as though I was accountable, as though my rank and title did not excuse reprehensible behavior. Thank you for that, Miss Thornton. Thank you for refusing to allow my cruelty to stand unchallenged. If you are willing to continue this correspondence, I would be grateful. If not, I understand completely. Yours in honesty and continued self-examination, Sebastian Winters. The letters continued. Every 3 or 4 days, a courier arrived at Willowmere, bearing another message from Sebastian Winters. Beatrice found herself anticipating them, checking the windows each morning to see if the rider approached, experiencing disappointment when days passed without correspondence. They wrote about everything: philosophy and literature, politics and history, the absurdities of social convention, and the loneliness of existing outside authentic connection. Sebastian proved remarkably well-read, his observations sharp and often darkly humorous. Beatrice discovered she could match him observation for observation, argument for argument, finding in written dialogue an intellectual stimulation she had never experienced in London ballrooms. Constance observed this development with amused interest, but said nothing, allowing her niece the privacy of her correspondence without prying questions or unwanted commentary. 4 weeks into the exchange, Sebastian's letter contained an unexpected proposal. Miss Thornton, I realize this may seem presumptuous given the circumstances of our acquaintance, but I find I can no longer continue this correspondence solely through letters. Written words, however honest, lack the nuance of direct conversation. I miss the challenge of reading facial expressions, the rhythm of immediate response, the subtle communication that exists beyond language. Would you permit me to visit Willowmere? I would come alone, properly chaperoned by your aunt's presence, staying at the local inn rather than imposing upon your household. One afternoon, perhaps 2 hours of conversation beneath what you have described as your remarkable oak tree. I understand if this request seems inappropriate. I understand if trust has not been sufficiently rebuilt to allow personal interaction. But I confess, I am desperate to move beyond paper and ink, to see if the connection we have established through writing translates to genuine human understanding. Please consider it. And please know that refusal would not end my appreciation for this correspondence or my commitment to continued honest communication. Yours in hope and trepidation, Sebastian. Beatrice carried this letter to the oak tree and read it 7 times, considering implications and risks, weighing curiosity against caution. Correspondence was safe, controlled, allowing her to craft responses carefully and present only the version of herself she chose to reveal. Conversation would be immediate, unpredictable, exposing reactions she could not edit or reconsider. Yet she found herself wanting to see him, wanting to discover if the man who wrote these letters matched the voice she had constructed in her imagination, wanting to test whether the transformation his words suggested was genuine or merely eloquent deception. She wrote her response that evening. Lord Pemberton, your request is accepted on several conditions. First, you will stay at the Rose and Crown in the village, not at Willowmere. Second, our meeting will occur in the afternoon, in the garden, visible from the house but private enough for genuine conversation. Third, my aunt will be present initially and will determine whether your conduct warrants her absence or continued supervision. Fourth, and most importantly, if at any moment I indicate this meeting should end, you will accept that determination without argument or negotiation. If these conditions are acceptable, you may call upon me next Thursday afternoon at 2 o'clock. Beatrice Thornton. His response arrived 2 days later, brief and definitive. All conditions accepted. I will arrive next Thursday at 2 o'clock precisely. Until then, I remain yours in gratitude and considerable nervousness, Sebastian. The days until Thursday passed with excruciating slowness. Beatrice changed her dress 3 times Thursday morning, before Constance physically removed the wardrobe key and selected a simple but elegant day dress of soft green muslin. "You look lovely," Constance said firmly. "Now compose yourself and go wait beneath your tree. He will arrive precisely at 2 o'clock, because men of his distinction understand the necessity of precise timing, especially when undertaking such a perilous venture." Beatrice made her way to the oak at 1:45, carrying a book she had no intention of reading, settling onto the bench and trying to breathe normally. The afternoon was perfect, warm but not hot, with a light breeze carrying the scent of roses from the garden and birds calling from the orchard beyond. At exactly 2 o'clock, she heard footsteps approaching on the gravel path. Sebastian Winters emerged from between the apple trees, and Beatrice felt her breath catch despite all her preparations. He looked different than she remembered from that terrible afternoon at Marianne's wedding. Smaller somehow, though he was still tall and imposing. More uncertain, despite his formal bearing. His gray eyes found hers across the meadow, and she saw in them something she had not noticed before. Fear. He was afraid. "Miss Thornton, I am profoundly grateful that you granted me this opportunity," he said, stopping at a respectful distance from the bench. "Lord Pemberton," she replied, proud that her voice remained steady. "Please sit down. You look as though you expect me to throw something at you." A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "Can you blame me for the caution?" "Not at all," Beatrice admitted, "though I should warn you that I rarely throw beverages at the same person twice. Where would be the novelty in repetition?" He sat on the opposite end of the bench, maintaining careful distance, his hands clasped tightly together. Up close, Beatrice could see details the previous encounter had not allowed her to notice. The fine lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he had once smiled frequently. The slight tremor in his fingers that betrayed his nervousness. The careful way he held himself, as though expecting rejection at any moment. "Your letters," Sebastian began, then stopped, seeming to search for words. "Your letters have been the most genuine communication I have experienced in longer than I care to admit. I feared that meeting in person would reveal them to be some form of elaborate deception, that the intelligence and insight you demonstrated would prove to be carefully constructed illusion." "And now?" Beatrice asked. "Having seen me, do you still suspect deception?" "Now," Sebastian said softly, finally meeting her eyes fully. "I suspect I have been granted an extraordinary opportunity I do not deserve. You are precisely as your letters suggested. More so, actually. Words on paper cannot fully capture the strength in your gaze or the courage it requires to sit here conversing with the man who humiliated you so thoroughly." Constance appeared on the path at that moment, ostensibly checking on them, but clearly assessing Sebastian's conduct. He stood immediately, bowing respectfully as Beatrice made introductions. "Lord Pemberton," Constance said coolly. "I trust you understand that my niece's well-being is my primary concern." "I would expect nothing less, madam," Sebastian replied. "I am grateful for your allowing this meeting, despite having every reason to refuse." Constance studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "I will be in the garden, should Beatrice require assistance." The unspoken threat hung clearly in the air. "You have 2 hours, my lord. Use them wisely." She departed, leaving them alone beneath the ancient oak. "Your aunt is formidable," Sebastian observed, settling back onto the bench. "She is the woman I aspire to become," Beatrice replied. "Utterly herself, apologizing to no one, content in her own company and choices. And yet you agreed to meet with me," Sebastian said. "A man who represented everything you have learned to reject." "No," Beatrice corrected gently. "You represented everything I learned to accept about myself. The difference is significant." They talked for 3 hours, not 2. They talked as the afternoon sun moved across the sky, as shadows lengthened beneath the oak, as the world narrowed to just this conversation. These two people discovering that words on paper had not lied. The connection was genuine, perhaps more so in person, where nuance and expression added layers written correspondence could not capture. Sebastian spoke about Helena with a tenderness that made Beatrice's heart ache, about loving someone from childhood, about grief so consuming it felt like drowning, about mistaking numbness for healing and cruelty for protection. Beatrice spoke about 6 seasons of accumulated rejection, about learning to make herself invisible, about the terrible moment when invisibility becomes so complete you disappear even from your own perception, about reclaiming dignity through a single dramatic gesture that changed everything while changing nothing. "I envy your courage," Sebastian said at one point, his voice quiet. "You shattered your own prison in a single moment. I have spent 4 years carefully constructing mine, adding new walls and locks, congratulating myself on my impenetrability." "Courage," Beatrice said, "is simply desperation that has run out of alternatives." "Then perhaps," Sebastian suggested, "we are both broken, and perhaps broken people understand each other in ways the whole never can." When Constance finally appeared to remind them that sunset approached and propriety had limits even in exile, Sebastian stood reluctantly, clearly wishing to extend the conversation indefinitely. "May I call again?" he asked. "Tomorrow, perhaps? Or is that too presumptuous?" "Tomorrow," Beatrice agreed, surprised by how much she wanted to see him again, to continue conversations that felt more real than any she had experienced in London's glittering ballrooms. Same time, same place. "I will count the hours," Sebastian said, and the simple sincerity in his voice made something in Beatrice's chest tighten with unexpected emotion. He called every day for 2 weeks. Every afternoon at 2 o'clock precisely, Sebastian Winters appeared on the path from the village, usually carrying some small gift. A book he thought she might enjoy. Flowers from the village market. Once, a worn copy of Don Quixote that had belonged to his father. They discussed philosophy and debated politics, argued about poetry, and shared opinions on novels they had both read. Sebastian proved remarkably well read about topics society deemed inappropriate for feminine discussion, and he treated Beatrice's opinions with the respect they deserved, rather than the condescension she had grown accustomed to receiving. More significantly, they spoke with complete honesty, holding nothing back, presenting themselves without the social masks that dominated interaction in London. Sebastian described his worst moments of the past 4 years, the depths of his cruelty, the ways he had deliberately hurt others to avoid confronting his own pain. Beatrice confessed how close she had come to accepting a proposal from a widower twice her age simply to escape the humiliation of remaining unmarried, how she had hated herself for even considering it. On the 10th day of his visits, they sat in companionable silence for several minutes, watching clouds move across the afternoon sky. Sebastian had removed his coat in the warmth, sitting in shirt sleeves that would have scandalized London society, but here seemed perfectly natural. Beatrice had removed her bonnet, letting the breeze cool her face, feeling more comfortable than she could remember feeling in any man's presence. "I need to tell you something," Sebastian said finally, his voice unusually hesitant. "Something I have been trying to find courage to say for days now." Beatrice felt her heart quicken, but kept her voice calm. "Whatever it is, we promised honesty." "We did," he agreed. "So here is my truth, uncomfortable as it may be." He turned to face her fully, his gray eyes intense. "You have demolished every wall I spent 4 years constructing. You have made me feel again, made me want to feel again. For the first time since Helena died, I find myself anticipating tomorrow instead of simply enduring today." "Sebastian," Beatrice began, but he held up one hand. "Please, let me finish before I lose my nerve." He took a breath. "I came to Dorset expecting to offer an apology and perhaps ease my conscience. Instead, I have found something I did not know I was seeking. I have found the first genuine person I have encountered since my wife's death. Someone who speaks truth without cruelty, who challenges me without contempt, who sees my failings clearly, but does not define me entirely by them." "What are you saying?" Beatrice asked, though some part of her already felt the weight of his words before he spoke them. "I am saying that I want to court you properly," Sebastian said quietly. "Not here in exile, where we are both hiding from the world, but in London, in society, where everyone can see that I have been granted a gift I do not deserve. I want to stand beside you at balls and dare anyone to suggest you are anything less than extraordinary. I want the world to know that you chose to forgive the man who wounded you most deeply, and that such forgiveness represents grace beyond anything I have ever known." Beatrice stared at him, stunned by the enormity of what he offered. Courtship meant returning to London, facing the scandal, enduring the whispers and speculation. It meant placing herself once again in the arena where she had been so thoroughly rejected, but this time with the Marquess of Pemberton openly declaring his regard. "I do not know if I can do that," she admitted. "Return to London, face all those people who have spent years pitying me or mocking me. Watch them try to understand why you would choose me when you could have anyone. Then let them wonder," Sebastian said fiercely. "Let them whisper and speculate and fail utterly to comprehend that I am choosing you because you are the only woman I have met who had the courage to show me who I had become and refused to accept it. You did not pity me or coddle me or excuse my cruelty. You held me accountable. You demanded better. That is worth more than all the beauty and youth and conventional appeal society prizes." "You speak as though I have already agreed," Beatrice said, but her voice held no reproach, only wonder at the sincerity blazing in his eyes. "I speak as though I am desperate for you to agree," Sebastian corrected. "I speak as a man who has been empty for 4 years and has finally found something worth fighting for. I speak as someone who owes you more than mere courtship. I owe you the public acknowledgement that you were right, that I was wrong, that humiliation I deserved revealed truths I needed to confront." Beatrice stood, needing to move, needing space to think. She walked to the edge of the oak's shade, looking back toward Willowmere, toward the sanctuary Constance had provided. 6 weeks ago, she had arrived here defeated, exiled, certain her life held nothing but quiet obscurity in the countryside. Now Sebastian Winters, Marquess of Pemberton, sat on a bench behind her offering everything she had wanted 6 years ago when she first entered London society. Everything she had stopped believing she deserved after season upon season of rejection. "If I agree," she said slowly, turning back to face him, "there will be conditions." Sebastian stood immediately. "Name them." "First, I will not return to London immediately. I need time to prepare myself mentally and emotionally for what that return will require." "Agreed. I will return to London, put my affairs in order, and wait until you are ready. Second, you will not defend me against gossip or speculation. If I am to reclaim my dignity, I must do so on my own terms, not through your protection." Sebastian frowned at this, but finally nodded. "If that is what you wish, though it will require tremendous restraint on my part to remain silent when people speak ill of you." "Third," Beatrice continued, her voice strengthening, "if at any point during this courtship I decide it is not what I want, you will accept that decision without argument or pressure. My autonomy was stripped away through 6 years of rejection and social judgment. I will not surrender it again, not even to you." "I would never ask you to," Sebastian said quietly. "Your right to choose always is non-negotiable." "Then yes," Beatrice said, the words feeling both terrifying and exhilarating. "Yes, I will allow you to court me properly. I will return to London and face society with you. But understand this, Sebastian. I am not doing this because I need rescue or redemption. I am doing this because somewhere in the past 2 weeks, beneath this oak tree, I have discovered that you might be worth the risk of allowing someone close enough to wound me again." Sebastian crossed the space between them in 3 strides, stopping just short of touching her, his hands raised as though he wanted to reach for her, but was holding himself back through sheer force of will. "May I?" he asked, and Beatrice understood he was asking permission for physical contact, respecting the boundaries she had not even known she needed to establish. "Yes," she whispered. He took her hands in his grip gentle but firm, his thumb tracing small circles across her knuckles. "Thank you," he said simply. "Thank you for giving me a chance I do not deserve. Thank you for believing people can change, can grow, can become better than their worst moments. I will spend every day proving your faith was not misplaced." They stood like that for several moments, hands clasped, the world reduced to this simple connection. Then Beatrice stepped back, needing to break the intensity before it overwhelmed her completely. "You should return to London," she said, proud that her voice remained steady despite the emotions churning through her. "Make whatever preparations you need to make. Send word when you are ready, and I will come." "How will I know when you are ready?" Sebastian asked. Beatrice smiled, feeling something shift inside her, some final piece of armor falling away. "You will know because I will arrive on your doorstep, probably without warning, definitely without permission, and I will expect you to be prepared for every scandal and speculation that follows." "I will count the days," Sebastian promised. "And when you arrive, I will be ready to stand beside you against whatever London society wishes to throw at us, metaphorically or literally." "Excellent," Beatrice said. "Because, after what I threw at you, anything society manages will seem positively tame by comparison." Sebastian laughed, genuine and full, the sound so unexpected that Beatrice found herself laughing too, the tension breaking into something lighter, something that felt remarkably like hope. He departed an hour later, after sharing tea with Constance and assuring her of his honorable intentions with such earnest sincerity that even Constance's skepticism softened slightly. As his carriage rolled away down the lane toward the village, Beatrice stood at the window, watching until it disappeared, feeling simultaneously terrified and exhilarated by what she had agreed to. "Well," Constance said from behind her, "that was unexpected. Do you trust him?" "I do not know yet," Beatrice admitted, "but I think I want to find out." "That," Constance said, placing a hand on her niece's shoulder, "is as good a place as any to begin." Beatrice remained at Willowmere for another month, using the time to prepare herself mentally and emotionally for returning to London. Letters from Sebastian arrived every 3 days, describing his preparations, assuring her that he was ready whenever she chose to come, never pressuring her to accelerate her timeline. She also received an unexpected letter from Marianne, returned from her wedding trip and apparently informed of everything that had transpired. The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, and Beatrice carried it to her oak tree before opening it, bracing herself for whatever judgment or criticism her younger sister might deliver. "Dearest Beatrice, I have heard about your exile and the circumstances that led to it. I have also heard, through sources I will not name, about Lord Pemberton's subsequent visits to Willowmere. I need to tell you something I should have said years ago, but lacked the courage or maturity to express properly. I am sorry. I am sorry for taking for granted every advantage I possessed. I am sorry for never acknowledging how difficult the past 6 years must have been for you. I am sorry for allowing mother and father to treat you as though marriage failure was somehow your personal failing rather than mere circumstance and misfortune. Most of all, I am sorry for never telling you that I saw your strength, your intelligence, your quiet dignity in the face of constant dismissal. I was too young and too selfish to recognize what courage it required to keep attending balls and assemblies, knowing you would once again be overlooked. You deserved better from your family. You deserved better from society. You deserved better from me. I do not know what will happen with Lord Pemberton. I do not know if his courtship is genuine or if he is simply assuaging his conscience. But I know this. If you choose to return to London with him, I will stand beside you. I will defend you. I will make certain everyone knows that you are my sister, and I am proud of you, not ashamed. And if you choose not to return, if you choose to remain at Willowmere and build a life away from society's judgment, I will support that choice completely. You threw wine in a Marquess'S face, Beatrice. You defended your dignity when everyone else had abandoned you. I want to be more like you when I finally find the courage to cease conforming to others' expectations. With love and long overdue respect, your sister, Marianne Beatrice, read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face by the 3rd reading. She had not realized how much she needed Marianne's acknowledgement, how deeply the distance between them had wounded her. This letter, with its honest contrition and genuine support, healed something Beatrice had not known was broken. She wrote back immediately, accepting Marianne's apology and offering one of her own for any resentment she had harbored. Sisters, she wrote, should support each other rather than compete, and she looked forward to building a better relationship when she returned to London. When she returned, not if. The decision had been made, she realized, probably days ago, though she had not consciously acknowledged it until this moment. She wrote to Sebastian that evening, "I will arrive in London next Thursday. Have your household prepared for scandal, speculation, and potentially more beverages being thrown, though I promise this time they will not be directed at you. I am nervous. I am terrified, actually. But I am also ready to stop hiding, to stop allowing society's judgment to dictate my choices, to step back into the world as someone who knows her own worth regardless of what others choose to see. Be ready, Sebastian, because I intend to cause quite a stir, and I expect you to stand beside me through all of it. With determination and significant trepidation, Beatrice." His response arrived within 2 days, brief and definitive. "I will be ready. London will be ready, and anyone who dares to judge you will discover that this particular Marquess will defend his future with uncharacteristic speed. Your devoted and entirely prepared, Sebastian." Beatrice departed Willowmere on a bright Thursday morning in late August. Constance accompanied her to the carriage, pressing a leather-bound journal into her hands. "Write everything down," her aunt advised. "The good, the bad, the scandalous. You are embarking on an extraordinary adventure, and adventures deserve proper documentation." "Thank you," Beatrice said, embracing Constance tightly. "For everything. For providing sanctuary when I needed it. For allowing me space to heal. For never making me feel like a burden." "You could never be a burden," Constance replied firmly. "You are the most interesting thing that has happened to this house in 30 years. Now go back to London and show them all what real courage looks like." The journey to London took 2 days, as before, but this time Beatrice felt no dread, no shame. She felt instead a fierce determination, a readiness to face whatever waited for her, with her dignity intact and her worth unquestioned, regardless of society's opinions. Sebastian had written that he would be waiting at his London residence when she arrived, that he had prepared his household to receive her properly, that everything was ready. But Beatrice had one stop to make first. She directed her carriage to her family's townhouse in Mayfair, arriving unannounced and unexpected on a Friday afternoon when she knew her parents would be receiving callers. The butler's expression when he opened the door suggested he thought he was seeing a ghost. "Miss Beatrice," he stammered, "we were not expecting you." "I am aware," Beatrice replied calmly. "Please inform my parents that I have returned and would like to speak with them." She waited in the entrance hall while the butler scurried away, hearing muffled exclamations from the drawing room, recognizing her mother's voice raised in what sounded like alarm. Then her parents emerged, both looking shocked and uncertain. "Beatrice," her father said stiffly, "this is unexpected." "I imagine so," Beatrice replied. "I have returned to London at the invitation of Lord Pemberton, who has requested permission to court me properly. I wanted you to hear this from me, rather than through gossip." Her mother's face cycled through several emotions in rapid succession. Shock, disbelief, calculation, and finally something that might have been cautious hope. "Lord Pemberton, the Marquess, he wishes to court you?" "He does," Beatrice confirmed, "and I have accepted. I wanted to inform you because you are my parents, and I respect that courtesy, but I am not seeking your permission or approval. I am 27 years old, and I make my own choices now." Her father studied her for a long moment, and Beatrice saw the exact instant he recognized something had fundamentally changed. She was not the defeated, ashamed woman they had exiled 2 months earlier. She stood before them now with confidence they had never seen her display. Beatrice noted that the sheer rank of the Marquess had overridden their moral judgment and shame regarding the scandal. "Very well," Lord Thornton said finally. "If Lord Pemberton is genuine in his intentions, we will not stand in your way." "How generous," Beatrice replied, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have another call to make." She departed before they could respond further, leaving them standing in their entrance hall looking thoroughly bewildered. Sebastian's London residence occupied a prominent position in Grosvenor Square, a massive townhouse of white stone. Beatrice's carriage stopped before the imposing front steps, and before she could fully alight, the front door opened and Sebastian himself appeared, clearly having been watching for her arrival. He descended the steps quickly, offering his hand to help her from the carriage with such care and obvious relief that Beatrice felt her remaining nervousness dissipate. "You came," he said simply. "I said I would," Beatrice replied. "Though I should warn you that I just informed my parents of your courtship without seeking their permission first. That may have been improper." Sebastian laughed, genuine and delighted. "That," he said, "is the most proper impropriety I have ever heard described. Come inside. I have prepared the blue drawing room for your comfort, and the entire household has been instructed to treat you with the utmost respect." The interior of the house proved as impressive as the exterior, all elegant proportions and expensive furnishings, yet somehow managing to feel lived in rather than merely displayed. Sebastian guided her to the blue drawing room, which offered comfortable seating and windows overlooking the square's private garden. "How do you feel?" he asked once they were settled. "Nervous? Terrified? Ready to flee back to Dorset?" "All of those," Beatrice admitted, "but also strangely calm. I have spent 2 months preparing myself mentally for this moment, and I find I am ready for whatever comes next." "Then I should warn you," Sebastian said, his expression growing serious, "that what comes next will likely invite relentless scrutiny. The moment word spreads that I am courting you, every drawing room in London will explode with speculation. Some will assume I am mad. Others will suggest you have somehow ensnared me through manipulation or trickery. A few will remember the wine incident and find the entire situation darkly humorous." "And how do you plan to respond?" Beatrice asked. "By courting you exactly as you deserve," Sebastian replied. "Publicly, proudly, and with absolute disregard for anyone's opinions but yours and mine. I will escort you to balls and assemblies. I will dance with you, exclusively if you prefer, scandalously often if you do not. I will make certain everyone knows that you are the woman I have chosen and that their judgment is entirely irrelevant to me." "That will cause significant scandal," Beatrice observed. "Good," Sebastian said firmly. "I am done with propriety that excuses cruelty. Let them be scandalized. Let them whisper and speculate. I have spent 4 years caring too much about society's opinions. I will not waste another moment on such pointless concern." Beatrice felt something in her chest expand, some final reservation dissolving in the face of his absolute certainty. "Then we shall scandalize them together," she said, "and perhaps in doing so, we will demonstrate that there are more important things than meeting society's narrow expectations." "Like genuine connection," Sebastian said softly. "Like choosing truth over performance. Like finding someone who sees you completely and chooses you anyway." "Precisely," Beatrice agreed. And in that moment, sitting in Sebastian's drawing room with afternoon light streaming through windows and possibilities spreading before her, she felt truly free for the first time in years. The scandal exceeded even Sebastian's predictions. Their first public appearance together, at Lady Weatherby's ball 3 days after Beatrice's return, created a sensation that rippled through the assembled crowd like a stone thrown into still water. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as Sebastian entered with Beatrice on his arm, both of them dressed impeccably, both holding their heads high despite the stunned silence that greeted them. Then the whispers began, urgent, excited, spreading from group to group like wildfire. Is that Miss Thornton? The one who threw wine at him? What is he thinking? Has he lost his mind? She has ensnared him somehow. This cannot possibly be genuine. Look how boldly she enters, as though she has every right. Sebastian felt Beatrice's arm tighten slightly on his, the only indication she had heard the commentary. He covered her hand with his own, a gesture of support and solidarity, then guided her directly to the center of the ballroom, where they would be most visible. "Are you ready?" he murmured. "No," Beatrice admitted. She swallowed down the sudden urge to flee, forcing her spine straight. "But I am here anyway." "That," Sebastian said, "is the definition of courage." He led her into the first dance, a waltz that required proximity and coordination, and ignored every shocked face, every raised eyebrow, every barely concealed expression of disbelief. Beatrice followed his lead with natural grace, and Sebastian found himself marveling at how perfectly they moved together, how easily they found rhythm and connection. "They are staring," Beatrice observed quietly. "Let them," Sebastian replied. "I am dancing with the most interesting woman in London." Their shock only confirms how little they understand about what truly matters. Halfway through the dance, Lady Weatherby herself approached, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Lord Pemberton," she said, her voice carrying enough to be heard by nearby couples. "I was not aware you had formed an attachment." "Then you have not been paying sufficient attention, Lady Weatherby," Sebastian replied smoothly. "Miss Thornton and I have been corresponding for weeks. I am courting her properly, with her family's knowledge and approval." "How extraordinary," Lady Weatherby said. "Indeed," Sebastian agreed. "I find extraordinary women require extraordinary courtship. Conventional approaches would hardly be sufficient for someone of Miss Thornton's intelligence and character." Beatrice squeezed his arm gently, a silent acknowledgement of his defense, and Sebastian felt a surge of protectiveness so fierce it surprised him with its intensity. They remained at the ball for 2 hours, dancing 3 times together in defiance of propriety that permitted only 2, conversing with anyone brave enough to approach them, presenting a united front against speculation and judgment. By the time they departed, Sebastian knew the evening would be discussed in drawing rooms across London for weeks. "That was exhausting," Beatrice admitted, once they were safely in his carriage heading back toward her family's townhouse. "It was," Sebastian agreed. "You showed fortitude and defiance. You stood there as though you had every right to be present, to be courted, to be valued." "I felt like fleeing at least 7 times, Beatrice confessed. "Yet you did not flee," Sebastian pointed out. "You stayed, you danced, you met their judgment with dignity. That is what matters." Over the following weeks, they established a routine. Sebastian called upon Beatrice every afternoon for exactly the permitted 20 minutes, always proper, always chaperoned. They attended balls and assemblies together, danced scandalously often, and gradually, grudgingly, society began to accept that this unconventional courtship might actually be genuine. Marianne proved true to her word, defending Beatrice vocally and publicly, shutting down speculation with fierce loyalty that earned her sister's eternal gratitude. Edmund, her husband, supported this stance completely, making it clear that anyone who disparaged his sister-in-law would face social consequences. 6 weeks into the courtship, Sebastian invited Beatrice to visit his country estate in Hampshire, properly chaperoned by both Constance and Marianne. The property, called Winter's End, spread across 500 acres of rolling countryside, with the main house built of warm, honey-colored stone and surrounded by gardens that rivaled anything Beatrice had seen in London. They walked the grounds together, Sebastian pointing out improvements he planned to make, Beatrice offering suggestions that revealed her practical intelligence. At one point, they reached a small lake at the property's eastern edge, surrounded by weeping willows that created a curtain of privacy. "I need to tell you something," Sebastian said, stopping at the lake's edge. "Something I have been trying to find the right moment to say." Beatrice turned to face him fully, seeing in his expression a vulnerability that made her heart quicken. "What is it?" "I love you," Sebastian said simply. "I am in love with you, Beatrice Thornton. Not because you forgave me when you had no reason to do so. Not because you demonstrated courage I aspire to possess. Not because society's judgment makes this relationship deliciously scandalous. I love you because you are the first person in 4 years who has made me want to be better than I am, who has shown me that transformation is possible, who has proven that connection is worth the risk of vulnerability." Beatrice felt tears pricking at her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "Sebastian," she whispered. "You do not have to respond now," he continued quickly. "I do not expect you to feel the same way simply because I have declared myself. I only needed you to know. I needed to be honest about what these weeks have meant to me, about how thoroughly you have changed my understanding of what love can be." "Stop talking," Beatrice said softly, reaching up to touch his face gently. "You have been honest. Now let me be honest in return." She took a breath, feeling the weight and rightness of what she was about to say. "I love you too. I fought it initially because loving you felt dangerous after everything that happened. But somewhere between your letters and our conversations beneath Constance's oak tree, and watching you defend me against society's judgment, I stopped fighting. You are not the man who insulted me in that garden. You are the man who acknowledged his failures, accepted responsibility, and chose to become better. That person is worth loving." Sebastian's expression transformed, hope and joy and relief washing across his features. "May I kiss you?" he asked, and Beatrice felt a sudden, profound warmth spread through her chest at this continued respect for her autonomy. "Yes," she breathed. "Please, yes." He kissed her gently, reverently, as though she was something precious that might break under too much pressure. Beatrice felt herself melt into him, felt 4 years of his isolation and 6 years of her rejection dissolving in this moment of connection, of choosing vulnerability, of trusting that love might be worth every risk. When they finally separated, both breathing hard, Sebastian rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he whispered. "Please, Beatrice, marry me, and let me spend the rest of my life proving that your faith in me was justified." "Yes," Beatrice said, tears finally falling freely. "Yes, Sebastian, I will marry you. Not because you are a Marquess, not because you can provide security, but because you are the first person who has ever made me feel truly seen, truly valued for who I am, rather than who society expects me to be." They kissed again, longer this time, deeper, sealing a promise that felt more binding than any formal vows could ever be. The engagement was announced 1 week later, causing one final explosion of scandal across London society. The notice appeared in the Morning Post, formal and traditional, stating that Sebastian Nathaniel Winters, Marquess of Pemberton, was engaged to marry Miss Beatrice Georgiana Thornton, with the wedding to take place within 3 months. The reactions varied from genuine happiness to absolute outrage. Some praised Sebastian for looking beyond conventional beauty to recognize substance and character. Others suggested Beatrice had somehow manipulated him, perhaps through witchcraft or feminine wiles. A few remembered the wine incident and found the entire progression darkly hilarious. Sebastian and Beatrice ignored them all. They spent the weeks before the wedding in careful preparation, selecting flowers and music, deciding on vows that felt personal rather than merely traditional. Beatrice chose to be married at St. George's, Hanover Square, the most prominent church in Mayfair, making a statement that she had nothing to hide, no shame about this union. The night before the wedding, Constance hosted a small dinner at the London townhouse she had rented for the occasion. Only immediate family attended, along with a handful of close friends. Sebastian raised a glass to toast his bride-to-be, his words simple but weighted with emotion. "To Beatrice," he said, his gray eyes finding hers across the table, "who threw wine in my face and thereby saved my life, who refused to accept my cruelty and demanded I become better, who taught me that love is not weakness but the greatest courage. Tomorrow I marry the most extraordinary woman I have ever known, and every scandal, every whisper, every raised eyebrow is worth it. To transformation, to redemption, and to love that emerges from the most unexpected circumstances." "To Beatrice," the assembled guests echoed, raising their glasses. Beatrice felt tears threaten, but blinked them back, determined to savor this moment of perfect happiness, of family gathered in support rather than judgment, of a future spreading before her filled with possibilities she had stopped believing could exist. The wedding dawned clear and bright, with September sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows of St. George's and bathing the interior in jeweled light. Beatrice stood in the vestibule wearing a gown of ivory silk that Marianne had helped select, simple but elegant, without the excessive decoration that dominated wedding fashion. "Are you nervous?" Marianne asked, adjusting Beatrice's veil with careful fingers. "Surprisingly, no," Beatrice replied honestly. "I feel calm, ready, like I am exactly where I am supposed to be." "He loves you very much," Marianne observed. "I doubted him initially, I admit. I thought perhaps this was merely conscience assuaging itself. But watching him these past weeks, seeing how he looks at you, how he defends you, how he speaks about you when he thinks no one is listening, he truly loves you." "I know," Beatrice said softly, "and I love him, not because he is perfect, because he is not. Not because he never fails, because he does, but because he is willing to be better, willing to change, willing to acknowledge his mistakes and grow from them." The church filled rapidly with guests, far more than Beatrice had anticipated. Her parents sat in the front pew, looking uncomfortable but present. Constance beamed from her seat, clearly delighted by the entire dramatic progression. Friends from 6 failed seasons attended, some genuinely happy for her, others merely curious to witness the spectacle. And standing at the altar, looking devastating in his formal wedding attire, Sebastian waited. The music began. Beatrice took her father's arm, feeling his tension, knowing this was difficult for him, though he would never admit it. They began the slow walk down the aisle, and Beatrice kept her eyes fixed on Sebastian, watching his expression transform from nervous anticipation to absolute joy as she approached. When they reached the altar, her father transferred her hand to Sebastian's with formal stiffness, then retreated to his seat. Sebastian's fingers tightened on hers, warm and strong and certain. "You are beautiful," he whispered, barely audible beneath the organ music. "You promised not to use flattery," Beatrice reminded him, but she smiled as she said it. "That is not flattery," Sebastian replied. "It is observable fact." The ceremony proceeded with traditional solemnity, the vicar's words washing over them as they stood hand in hand, making vows that felt more real than any Beatrice had ever spoken. To honor, to cherish, to love through all circumstances. Words that once seemed impossibly distant now felt like simple truth. When the vicar finally pronounced them married, Sebastian kissed her with such tender intensity that applause broke out spontaneously across the church, tradition forgotten in favor of genuine celebration. They walked back down the aisle together as husband and wife, and Beatrice felt the weight of 6 years of rejection finally lift from her shoulders, replaced with something lighter, brighter, infinitely more precious. The reception at winter's end proved to be an elegant affair, with hundreds of guests filling the ballroom and spilling out into the gardens. Sebastian never left Beatrice's side, his hand at her back or holding hers, making it clear to everyone present that his devotion was absolute. Late in the evening, as the sun set and lanterns were lit throughout the gardens, Sebastian led Beatrice away from the crowds to a quiet terrace overlooking the lake. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge one by one across the darkening sky. "Do you have any regrets?" Sebastian asked quietly. Beatrice considered the question seriously. 6 failed seasons, public humiliation, exile, scandal upon scandal. The path that led her here had been painful, often brutal, seemingly endless. "No," she said finally, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "Not even the worst moments. Because all of it, every rejection and disappointment, every moment of shame and grief, all of it led me here. To you. To this. To understanding that my worth was never dependent on society's approval, that transformation is possible, that love can emerge from the most unlikely circumstances." "I threw away 4 years," Sebastian said softly. 4 years of isolation and cruelty that I can never recover." "You cannot change the past," Beatrice agreed. "But you can honor it by refusing to repeat it. You can acknowledge your failures while choosing better now. That is all any of us can do." Sebastian turned to face her fully, his hands framing her face with infinite gentleness. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for seeing past the worst of me. Thank you for demanding better. Thank you for believing change was possible. You are my salvation, Beatrice. My redemption. My proof that even the most frozen heart can thaw if someone has courage enough to wait. And you," Beatrice replied, "are my proof that dignity reclaimed is worth every scandal, that standing up for myself taught me to save myself, and in doing so, offered me the courage to help you." They kissed as the last light faded from the sky, as music drifted from the ballroom behind them, as their future spread before them filled with possibilities neither had dared imagine just 3 months earlier. 3 months, from wine thrown in fury to vows spoken in love, from cruelty in a garden to connection beneath an oak tree, from exile to redemption, from isolation to union. It seemed impossible. It was impossible. And yet here they stood together, proof that transformation could happen in the space between heartbeats, that love could bloom in the most unlikely soil, that courage to defend one's dignity could open doors previously locked. "I love you," Sebastian said again, the words he could not seem to say often enough. "I love you too," Beatrice replied, "now and always, through scandal and speculation, through judgment and joy. We are in this together now." "Together," Sebastian echoed, and in that single word Beatrice heard everything she had spent 6 years desperately seeking. Partnership, respect, understanding, love that saw her completely and chose her anyway. They returned to the reception hand in hand, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that whatever challenges awaited, they would meet them as they had met everything else since that day in the garden. Together, honestly, courageously, and with the absolute certainty that some things, the most important things, are worth every risk, every scandal, every moment of vulnerability required to achieve them. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end. If this story of courage, transformation, and unexpected love touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us continue creating stories of redemption, dignity reclaimed, and love that emerges from the most unlikely circumstances. Together, we keep these stories alive.